10 insane moments that led to anger backstage in WWE. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for daily wrestling videos and follow us on Facebook for exclusive lists. Number 10. Seth Rollins addresses CM Punk. Now, when CM Punk walked out of WWE, it became a common trope that fans would chant his name whenever they were watching a segment or match they didn't enjoy. Upon the crowd chanting Punk's name at Seth Rollins in 2019, Rollins decided to go off script and he would go off on a tangent about how he tried to get Punk to be here in person. Whilst this comment shut the crowd down, the atmosphere backstage was tense and Vince McMahon was legitimately furious. The Wrestling Observer would report Vince McMahon was furious at Seth Rollins for responding in ring to the CM Punk chants on Raw. It's believed that McMahon was annoyed that Rollins would basically build to a match that was never even going to happen, well, at least that point in time. In Rollins' defense, the chants needed to be shut down as quickly as possible, as time and time again wrestlers had allowed the chants to get carried away, and they were known to ruin major segments. Number 9. No male on female contact. Vince McMahon had a concrete rule on male wrestlers physically touching female talent, and when Scott Dawson brushed past Alexa Bliss in a backstage segment on Raw in 2019, McMahon lost it. According to Dawson, who now uses the name Dax Harwood on his podcast, McMahon chewed him out in the gorilla position. I remember that we were supposed to come in and we were supposed to be very animated and happy that I won. So I came in, pretended that I was playing the trumpet or something, and I was in the marching band, and I marched by Alexa Bliss, and my shoulder barely brushed her shoulder. Barely brushed it. I begged people to go back and watch it. As soon as it was over, we got called into the gorilla position, and Vince chewed me out, and he said, "Man, don't touch women." Vince McMahon being the authority on this is interesting to say the very least. Number 8. A pay-per-view main event doesn't land. Now, the main event of a pay-per-view event should be the biggest match on the show, and in 2019, the annual Survivor Series was main evented by the 3 respective women's champions in the company facing each other in a triple threat collision. Shayna Baszler would take on Bayley and Becky Lynch, and unfortunately, the match didn't really click, as there were a number of awkward spots and the crowd weren't interested in the action. The atmosphere backstage was reportedly heated as McMahon was livid that the match wasn't going to plan, and it was even reported that McMahon began to call the match via his headset and he was feeding instructions for spots. Now, this is a strange thing to get annoyed about, as whilst the match wasn't great, the match and the key spots would have been planned out in advance, so McMahon would have known what the match was going to contain. Number 7. Dean Ambrose is cheered. Vince McMahon rarely attended live events, and he liked to rely on agents and producers to give him feedback on how the event was perceived by the audience. In 2019, WWE booked a heel Ambrose versus a babyface EC3 on the live event circuit, and when it was reported back to Vince McMahon that Ambrose was being cheered, McMahon was less than thrilled. And McMahon failed to realize that the fans had no interest in booing Ambrose, and this is what Ambrose had to say about the incident during an interview on Talk is Jericho. So by the time we get to that Monday there, from what I understand, the reports from the house shows the producers telling him what happened, and he's pissed. Apparently he's mad about this. Now, like, God forbid, so sorry that the fans who I've busted my ass for years might be upset at the fact that you want to bury me on my way out. You know, like, sorry dude, you know? This reaction ultimately cost EC3 his main roster push, as unfortunately all the blame fell on his shoulders. Number 6. Bronson Reed's in-ring work. Bronson Reed has been a standout addition to the main roster since his WWE return, but Vince McMahon and the old regime weren't exactly his biggest fan. When plans were being put in place for Reed to be called up to the main roster in 2021, it was determined that Reed would wrestle Drew Gulak on the June 24th edition of WWE Main Event. This match, on paper at least, was supposed to be a test to see how Reed does against a main roster opponent. The match was well received by fans watching at home, however, McMahon reportedly didn't like the match, and he was so bothered by the quality of the match that Reed would be cut from his WWE contract just 2 months later. Reed had gone from being NXT North American Champion to being unemployed in a matter of months, and it was all because McMahon took issue with the way he worked. This highlighted just how out of touch the old regime truly was. Reed's work in NXT was stellar, and he worked the main roster match in the same way that he would an NXT match. So unless McMahon had never seen him work before, this was a truly baffling reason to be angry at Reed. Number 5. No shoot fighting. During the COVID-19 pandemic, WWE were able to retake matches if the old regime didn't like the first take, and this was something that Vince McMahon became heavily reliant on. The match between Shayna Baszler and Natalya on the May 11th, 2020 Raw would be retaped, and the reason for this is that McMahon hated it. McMahon believed that the two talented wrestlers looked like they were quote-unquote fighting each other. Now, this is an absurd critique and an insane reason to just be angry about. The former NXT Women's Champion discussed McMahon's reaction during an appearance on Renee Paquette's Oral Sessions podcast, and she mentioned, "The next week I had a match with Natty. Natty is way more experienced at this, obviously. Natty has trained with me in an MMA gym. I said, let's just shoot around a little bit and then we'll get to what we need to get to. We do it, he hates it. I went to the back and he said, it looks like you're just fighting each other. He makes us do it again." Baszler's style was literally the exact thing that he was complaining about. This was an indicator that Baszler was going to struggle to connect with McMahon during a time on the main roster. Number 4. Managerial antics. One of the fundamental issues with the old regime in WWE was that personal biases stopped certain wrestlers getting pushed. Vince McMahon was never a massive fan of the late great Luke Harper, and McMahon would often look for reasons to stop using him on TV. In 2019, Harper faced EC3 in a dark match before SmackDown, and the match was used to test out the partnership between EC3 and manager Drake Maverick. McMahon scolded the match and he took issue with the managerial dynamic between EC3 and Maverick. This was unusual, as the pair had been a major success in TNA, but McMahon clearly wasn't a fan. Although Harper had no role in the dynamic between the two, all the blame fell on him, as McMahon made the executive call to pull Harper from television with immediate effect. Number 3. The CM Punk Podcast. The CM Punk's podcast with Colt Cabana in late 2014 is arguably the most famous pro wrestling podcast episode that exists. The episode led to an expose of WWE, and key names such as Triple H and Vince McMahon were under fire. The reaction backstage following the podcast surfacing was a tale of two sides. McMahon, who fans expected to be livid, was said to be calm, as after all, wrestlers badmouthing the company wasn't anything new for him. But as for Triple H, he was enraged, and it was even reported that he wanted to react with violence. The same was said for Stephanie McMahon, who was evidently supporting her husband, and it's rare for the game to react in this manner, but Punk's comments really hit a nerve. Just under a decade later, Punk would return to WWE, and Punk and the game would make amends, and it's said that the two legends have a positive and healthy working relationship. Number 2. The Chair Shot. A logic would dictate that names such as The Undertaker and Triple H are immune from backstage anger. However, in 2011, when the two wrestled at WrestleMania 27, the atmosphere backstage was tense, and Vince McMahon was seething with two of his biggest names. The match featured a chair shot to the head, and the reason that this was so big was that WWE had implemented a ban on chair shots to the head years prior. This was down to concussion-related findings, as well as WWE being now a PG product. McMahon was so angry that these two would go off script in this capacity, and when the planned ending went down, which saw the dead man carted off, McMahon also hated how this was executed. This was more puzzling annoyance from McMahon, as how on earth did he hate a finish that he actually approved of? And number 1. A lockup. A feud between Seth Rollins and Dean Ambrose had hit a boiling point in 2018, and the two were to face off at the TLC pay-per-view. Due to the nature of the feud, fans expected an epic war, but when the bell rang, the two just began to lock up as if they were having a casual match on Raw. This completely derailed the momentum of the match and the feud, and the fans knew that the match was over before it had even begun. The fans began to turn on the match with chants of boring, and they even decided to chant for Becky Lynch. It was reported that Vince McMahon was losing his mind backstage and was furious at what he was seeing. McMahon should have known better, and he should have been fully aware that a blood feud match being booked in this way would have resulted in the fans rejecting it. McMahon was so livid that it was even reported that he was contemplating cancelling Rollins' planned 2019 push, but someone clearly talked him out of it, as Rollins would proceed to win the 2019 Royal Rumble as initially intended. But there you have it, folks, 10 insane moments that led to anger backstage in WWE. Be sure to leave your comments down below. I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.